Greetings and welcome to Creative Mornings, an ad hoc live show that explores creativity in its many guises. As any physicist will tell you, that time doesn't exist in any meaningful or describable form, so whatever the time of day is in your part of the world, it's always a creative morning. So, while we wait a minute for guests to join the stream, I'll go through my quick preamble of what Creative Mornings is. Each morning, I take a quick dip into some aspect of creative endeavor, be it music or art, digital design, media, video, animation, whatever. I try and mix it up with a different topic each day. Basically whatever I'm feeling into at that moment. And hopefully that motivates or inspires someone to go explore their own creativity or teaches someone a new technique or a quick tip or something. And with many of us in some form of lockdown or isolation at the moment, I figured it'd be a good time to take advantage of a little extra time and share a few things with the world. So I hope you'll join me and take a little journey through creativity with me over the coming days and weeks, months. Who knows how long this will go on. So let's get going with today's creative morning. So today I'm going to take a little look at sky replacement in Photoshop, which will be using, a lot of the masking and selection tools and techniques in Photoshop. Some of them fairly basic, some of them a little more advanced or a little more intermediate, shall we say. So something that's done quite often, sky replacement. Sky naturally shot is usually just like a flat blue if you're lucky, otherwise it's like a flat white or grey. Adding skies with interest or colour takes a little more skill, a little more patience. Maybe you don't always have the time for that, or you found a stock photograph that doesn't quite meet your requirements. So being able to digitally create a sky or comping a sky photograph from another shot into your background is something that's quite commonly done. So this would be a fairly straightforward and commonly used little trick. So let's get into that. Tab over to Photoshop. And we're going to be creating this image from this. We're going to take this fairly flat, boring sky and make some kind of sci-fi scene, some fantasy, vivid purple blue sky, and sort of punch up the foreground as well. It's obviously not completely realistic. If the sky really was that blue and purple, then a lot of that color would be reflected in the foreground in some way. But this is artistic license and creativity, and we're just having some fun. So it's more about learning the techniques than creating something hyper real. So let's excuse me, let's open the original, and this is just a shot I downloaded from Unsplash, which is a great source of free photography, really high quality. So you can grab this image as well. Search for desert landscape on Unsplash. So first thing I'm going to do is use the crop tool with a ratio of 16:9. Actually, first thing I'm going to do is tab over to full screen so you can see what I'm doing here. So I've got the crop tool, I've got a ratio of 16:9. Actually, let me yeah, well, we'll fix that in a minute. And I'm going to reposition the photograph within that 16:9 area. I'm just going to get the base of this tree just above the crop line. It gives me a bit of sky above here, and the horizon on the lower half of the middle third, so that's a good balance, I think. And I'm going to make that full screen. So the first thing I want to do is obviously make a nice selection that encompasses all of the background, separates the foreground from the background. So first thing I like to do is just duplicate the layer, and I keep this as a backup. So let's take the wand tool, and that will get us close. Obviously there's some work that needs to be done here in this area, but this selection 42, let me zoom in there a little bit and see what, yeah, maybe 42 is a bit much, so I'm going to lower that down to maybe 30, deselect and select again. That's looking okay. So again, I'm going to shift click using the wand tool. You can see when I hit the shift key, that little plus is added to the icon, so I'm adding pixels to the selection, and I'm just clicking in areas that haven't been selected just to try and get everything in my selection. So with that, I'm going to click the add layer mask to that, and now I've got the sky isolated, except for some touch up that needs to be done down here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to hold down the option key and click into the layer mask, and I'm going to zoom right in and inspect the edges, and they're looking a little crispy. These edges along here, there's not a lot of grey pixels, so I may want to go back and reselect those. Maybe no, it's definitely anti-aliasing. Now if I invert that mask so I can see what the foreground looks like, it doesn't look too bad, and I'm going to just temporarily add a layer beneath that with like a bright color, so I can see how that selection, yeah, okay, that's not too bad. Okay, so I think what I'm going to do is select this layer mask, select my brush tool, hardness, that's about right, the size about 30, smoothing, I don't want pressure sensitivity on, opacity up to 100, and I'm just going to paint with black to paint out just filling in these areas that didn't get selected. And let's zoom in here a little bit. I'm just very quickly rushing this. I would normally spend a little more time getting a cleaner selection. But I'm just trying to fill it in very quickly, and I'm using the mouse where I might normally use a Wacom tablet for any brushing or painting techniques. So just going to fill in that last little area. So if I deselect the mask real quick, you can see that there's actually some background that is getting blown out by the sun that the selection has kind of picked up. So what I'm going to do is try and paint that back in. If I switch my paint color to white, I'm going to paint that background back in. Just around this region, where I can kind of see those mountains on the horizon, and I'm going over, and I'll go back and remove the last little bit of the sky. So we can see we have this new horizon line along here that I'm now going to paint back out. So again, hit X to switch back to the black, and make a smaller brush to get in these little areas here, and just kind of get in the details here. And then I'm going to paint along that horizon, just to get that a little more accurate than the magic wand did at the beginning. And again, I'm going a little fast. I would probably take a little more care. And where the sun is glowing and blowing out that horizon, you can't really see it. I'm just going to kind of guesstimate where that horizon would actually go. And there's a bit of blowout here on this this edge that I'm going to paint back in. So I'm going to take the black again and just paint back in that area. And let's see. Okay, I think that's good enough. So there is our selection. So the first thing I want to do is duplicate this layer. I'm going to name this foreground, and I'm going to duplicate it, Command or Control J. I'm going to call this sky, and I'm going to select the layer mask and hit Command I to invert it, and now I have the sky just by inverting that. I'm going to, so the first thing I want to do is actually create a hue saturation, and I'm going to delete this layer mask, and I'm going to drag that into there. Option, drag that into there. So with the original sky, I'm going to convert this to a smart object, which will allow us to apply smart filters. And I'm going to take a motion blur. Okay. And as you can see, the motion blur has a layer mask, and I can option drag that okay, if I can remember how to do this, delete that layer mask, I am going to command click to load that selection. I'm going to go into this and I'm going to invert that. Okay, so I have a filter just on the sky. Then I can take my color correction, I'm going to bump that up to a nice bluey purple. I'm going to darken it. And just play with where I want that color to be. Okay. There. So what this sky layer does with the blur, it just takes some of that detail out of the clouds, so it's not quite as believable to have these natural looking clouds in the back there. It just knocks them back. It still has a little bit of color variation, a little bit of texture in the sky, but that looks a little realistic, the way the style of those clouds on Mars. I'm not sure you'd get those clouds, and this does look like a Martian landscape. So I'm just thinking I wanted to soften those clouds a little bit. Okay. Curves. Oh, God. Okay. So I'm going to rename this sky color. I'm going to add a curves and just do I'm going to drag this foreground mask and replace that, so I can do a quick punch up of the quick S curve, just to punch up the contrast on the foreground a little. You can kind of see that just adds a little more richness to it. Bringing the, let's play with the blue and see if we can make making it blue just makes it a little more a little less saturated. I don't really like that. So Okay, so that's kind of fun looking. Okay, so I'm going to call this FG color. So I'm color correcting the foreground, and I've replaced the color on the sky. So I can delete this now. If I put another curves above the foreground here and delete that layer mask and then just bump up the contrast, I wonder if it will give us a bit more of a gradient on the sky. No, it's not doing anything for me, so let's abandon that idea. We've got our sky, it's softened out. I think what I might like to do, if I double click this smart object, I go into the sky and I can add a layer, hit the G key for the gradient, D for default colors, and I'm just going to add a, I'm not sure why I selected orange to, I'll do black to white, default colors, and I'm just going to overlay that, and then maybe bring the let's bring that down to 30%, just to add a little bit of a gradient over the, let's try, okay, overlay seems to be, yeah, I don't like that. Yeah, overlay seems to be working the best. Alright, well let's do that. Now I can close this and close and save the smart object, and you can see now we have a little bit of gradient over in the sky there. Now I'm going to need to add that sky layer to the sky smart object, the sky layer mask, so you can see that the gradient was affecting the overall image. With that layer mask now, it's keeping that background clear. Got the sky color, we've got the foreground color. Okay, let me refer to this again. We've got so this area needs some work. In the original photograph, we've got all these rays where the sun is bleeding over the landscape and blowing out the background. So we want to bring some of that back in. So I'm going to add a new layer, Command Option Shift N, and I'm going to hit M twice to bring up the ellipse mask, and I'm going to hold down Option and Shift, which will draw a perfect circle from its center point, and I'm going to click somewhere around where this circle, again it hasn't got to be perfect, we can reposition it. Also, you noticed, get this warning, no pixels are more than 50% selected. That's because up here my feather settings are too high for that size of a selection, so I'm going to hit those back to 0, and I'm going to do that again. Option Shift again to make a Now I can either hold down the spacebar, but before releasing the mouse I can hold down the spacebar and I can reposition that and reposition it. And we'll go with that for now. And I'm going to fill that with white, so I'm going to hit X to switch my color swatches, Option Delete to fill that with white. Now obviously that's a nice crisp circle, so I'm going to blur that out with Gaussian blur, and maybe I'll make that a little less than, make that about 12 say, and maybe make it about 50% opacity. Is that what we had? Yeah. And also like to play with the blending modes to see if that white will interact with the background purple pixels a little. So again, using Shift plus and Shift minus will toggle through all the blending modes. And yes. Oh, actually that's quite nice. Overlay gets a lot of that. There must be difference. So shift through these quickly. Yes, soft light. Overlay's looking nice. So I'm going to rename this Sun. And I'm going to Command J to duplicate that. You can see already it's interacting quite nicely with the background purple pixels. And I'm going to hit Command T to bring up the transform. And I'm going to increase its scale about, say, 130%. And I'm going to do that a couple of times. I'm going to duplicate it, scale it up. Again, holding down Option and Shift will scale it proportionally from the center point. And do that one more time. Now it's all a little bit too hot there, so I think what I'm going to do is bring those back down to 60%. See how that looks. So we've got these increasingly smaller circles that get hot towards the center, and they're also not quite interacting with the background. So with them all selected, not interacting with the foreground, I should say. There's still some sunlight before that hot spot on the horizon. So I'm going to select all 4 layers and Command T again to transform them and scale them all up a little bit, and then bring them all down just to where they're. And if we look at the original, yeah, so that's a little more believable. I think I'm going to still make those a touch larger and maybe make them, I'll stay with 60%. That looks good. Okay, so one more thing. Maybe a quick overall, just to kind of glue it together a little bit. Just a quick color correction to glue it all together a little bit. let's select the select and mask tool, and so what I'm trying to do is just lose a little bit of the fringing around the edge of the foreground where the sky meets it. Sometimes you can, when you've got a, you know, one bright color against another color, or two dark colors against each other, when it's the dark color against a light background, that fringe really isn't quite as apparent. But so just by playing around and experimenting with these settings in it used to be called the refine. If you've got an older version of Photoshop, it might be called like refine edge. I think it's called mask and select or something now in the in later versions. But it just enables you to just sweeten up the selection areas a little bit. So I'm going to accept those edges. Is there a way to preview? I don't think there is. If we can toggle. But that just lost a little bit of the the edge there. What you could do, we could blur this. If I hold down the Option key, we again get to look just at the mask. I could blur these edges to try and sort of fake some light wrap, where the blue light of the background of the sky sort of wraps around the foreground. That's getting into a bit more of a, an advanced topic. So I think I'll leave that here for today. We've just got a nice edge along the border of the foreground. So we could also take into some color correction considerations with this sort of distant mountain here and make that a little bluer, just to make it feel like it's part of the environment a bit more. But again, as a sky replacement, a sort of fairly basic exercise, I think I'll leave that there for today. We can revisit this in another lesson. Okay, so if you've been following along, I think I'll post this Photoshop document, this PSD, and for anyone who wants to download this, I'll leave that in a link in the stream comments, and anyone who wants to sort of follow along at a later date will be able to do so. Okay, well, that is the end of that is the end of today's creative morning. Hope it helped or you got some value out of it. Stay tuned. I think tomorrow I'm going to play with some synth music, just to get a quick and dirty playtime. Maybe you've got half an hour just to sort of plug in a controller and play with some software synths. Again, it's all about exploring creativity, finding time, a little time to be inspired a little time to motivate you to play and explore creativity, even if maybe you're not a creative person, maybe you're not a musician, maybe you're not an artist, but you just want to take the time to play around and see what all the fuss over Photoshop or the or synthesized music or guitars, anything. We'll be looking at all of the following in the coming days. So join me again tomorrow for another creative morning. Be safe and be creative. Bye bye.